Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Just to let you know that the side event will be starting in 5 minutes in this room. Very welcome to join us. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello, good morning. We'll be starting shortly.
Hello, everyone. I am Ayman Cherkaoui with the Mohammed VI Foundation for Environmental Protection in Morocco. Thank you very much for having taken the time to be with us for this side event. This side event is co-organized with the General Confédération of Moroccan Enterprises. We'll have a representative speaking remotely. Very happy to have, of course, the chair of the AGN in person to be providing keynote remarks as well later. Mr. Alejandro Kirkpatrick with the UNFCCC Secretariat, manager of subdivision on capacity building, will be also speaking about the importance of capacity building. I would like to acknowledge as well the presence among us of the Secretary General of the IPCC, dear friend and colleague and supporter of this kind of activities for several years now. Thank you very much, Mr. Mouksid, for being here with us. As well as a representative, of course, of the Director General of the local authorities of the Kingdom of Morocco, as well as our brilliant speakers and moderators that you'll discover later today. So we'll be proceeding with the opening now. So I'd like to invite Mr. Alejandro Kirkpatrick to join me here at the dais. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. So as I mentioned, I think I'll switch to this one. Excellent. Thank you very much. So as I mentioned, this side event is co-organized by a series of stakeholders, and for the opening remarks session, we'll enjoy remarks by Mr. Alejandro Kirkpatrick as well as Mr. Saïd Hadi, who is connecting with us online. I can see he's connected. I can see Mr. Hadi's microphone is muted and camera is off, but I can see that he's connected with us. So to kick us off, very happy to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Mr. Alejandro Kirkpatrick, who's manager, capacity building subdivision within the means of implementation at the UNFCCC Secretariat, to share with us his views on the topic of today. As a reminder, we're looking at public sector, private sector, and youth climate action and projects from the African continent perspective. Mr. Kirkpatrick, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Dear Ayman, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to the invitation from the Mohammed VI Foundation and the other organizing partners. We have a long history of collaborating with the Mohammed VI Foundation, so it's very happy to be here. The subject matter of this side event is very timely because you have also framed it in the context of the global stocktake. And in the context of capacity building, I wanted to mention a couple of reflections on what are some of the emerging issues that we're hearing from the global stocktake as it pertains to capacity building, and how to take this issue forward, moving on from COP28. Several matters that are very important to highlight is how capacity building is a cross-cutting issue. It permeates across most of the major topics in the context of the Paris Agreement, be it mitigation, be it adaptation, climate finance, transparency, etc. So in that sense, capacity building remains fundamental for the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And some of the issues we've been hearing, particularly from developing countries, is about the importance of not only building capacities, but retaining those capacities. Retaining them in the context of still benefiting from international support that helps build capacities through workshops, trainings, etc. But how to capitalize from that and make sure those capacities are retained in the country, particularly at the institutional level, in the sense that a lot of the capacity is done on the individual level, and there is a lot of room for improvement to making sure those capacities remain at the institutional level. And for that, the issue of country ownership is fundamental, in the sense of how countries can be further empowered to not only assess their capacity building needs and gaps, but create a process that helps enhance them and retain them. And for that, the role of national actors is fundamental here, and that's something that I think is very interesting from this side event, that you're talking about key actors, particularly also from the context of capacity building, which are national or subnational governments. But I would also like to mention, for example, institutions that have national presence and permanence, like academia, research organizations. And of course, you're targeting two fundamental actors or stakeholders, youth, and the private sector. And I think when we talk about the private sector, there is a tendency to say, well, the private sector has resources, has money, they don't need capacity building. But I think it's on the contrary. For example, we just did a mapping study of capacity building needs and gaps for small and medium-sized enterprises in the MENA region. And that study came out with very interesting findings that there is a strong need from particularly small and medium-sized enterprises to better understand climate change issues and to build their capacities, for example, of what are climate risks, or to understand mitigation options, and also to how to access or scale or mobilize financing. Because one of the findings has to do the fact that SMEs usually are part of a larger value chain and provide goods and services to larger companies. But since there is a very positive mood to transition to more green business, then small and medium-sized enterprises have both an opportunity and a challenge. And for that, there is an important need to build their capacities. I also wanted to mention a couple of things based on the work we're doing. One is we support the work of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, which is one of the constituted bodies established under the Convention and the Paris Agreement. And their main mandate is to address current and emerging capacity needs and gaps, provide recommendations to parties on how to do that, and also enhance coherence and coordination on capacity building efforts. And I think that's a very important point that probably will be addressed also in this side event, how to make capacity building support more impactful and more coherent, and more better reach those actors more in need, like youth, climate sector, etc. So the PCCB, for example, has established what it calls the PCCB network, which is a voluntary association of more than, as of today, 350 organizations from different sectors. We have UN organizations, private sector, youth-led organizations, research organizations, and Mohammed VI Foundation actually is a very active member of the PCCB network. So I think this is an interesting avenue where organizations can join the network and not only exchange information, but also identify areas of collaboration. And we have had very good examples of how through the PCCB network, organizations have connected and started working together to deliver actual projects. So that's one initiative that I wanted to highlight. We also recently just launched, with the kind support of the government of Italy, an initiative called Youth for Capacity. It's a program intended to help enhance the capacity of young people in developing countries. We just initiated this initiative, and there was a series of events earlier last week. So that's something that maybe is an opportunity to connect with the activities will be presented here at this side event in terms of benefiting young people. And I think the intention is not to create new capacity building courses per se, but rather to build on what is already there and strengthen networks that can create a bit of a repository of capacity building actors and networks that could benefit more local-led efforts on the ground. So I just wanted to highlight that, and I think the discussions we're going to be having here are extremely relevant and in the context of really focusing at national level and in these actors and how to build capacities that are really aligned to the needs expressed by these actors, and that can have a multiplier effect in terms of not just building individual capacities, but more institutional capacities, and in the context of course, the implementation of the Paris Agreement. So very much looking forward to the ensuing discussions, and thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you. Very grateful. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for really highlighting the key elements we'll be discussing during our side events. And as the Mohammed VI Foundation for Environmental Protection, we're always delighted and happy to collaborate with the Secretariat, including in the PCCB network. And if you're not a member of the PCCB network, I strongly encourage you to join. Happy to also acknowledge the presence among us of my brother, Seni Nafo. Thank you as well for having taken the time. You mentioned the private sector. You mentioned historic collaboration. So I'm very happy to now give the floor to another important partner of the foundation, one that is also very committed to climate action and that speaks on behalf of the private sector. Mr. Saïd El-Hadi is the president of the Energy, Competitiveness and Green Economy Commission of the General Confédération of Moroccan Entreprises. Mr. El-Hadi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ayman. Do you hear me well first?
Yes, we hear you well. Thank you.
Okay, great. Hello, Mr. Kilpatrick. Hello to ladies and gentlemen. Happy to give some remarks at the opening of this session. I'll give some reminders about some facts and figures concerning Africa and the case of Morocco in particular. Well, first, just to remind that Africa is the continent that has contributed the least to climate change in the history, and still contributing the least compared to other continents. This is an important fact to remind. And still, Africa is performing well in terms of green energy. So if you have a look at the International Energy Agency database, you can see that in 2020, the amount of green energy is used in Africa compared to the global energy supply was 50%, 50, which is a very high rate, whereas Europe was performing an 18% rates, 1/8, and North America 10% rates. If you have a look at the energy sources used to produce electricity, again, Africa is doing well. Well, now Europe and North America is doing better, but in the same range. The green energy is used in producing electricity in Europe were 35% in 2020 in Europe, 25% in North America, and 23% in Africa. So Africa is also doing well at this regard in terms of performance. But yet, Africa is clearly deeply affected by the climate change and suffering to a great extent from its consequences. If I give the case of Morocco, we are currently, I mean, it's a today fact. Morocco is currently living its most severe drought sequence, recorded drought severe consequence, with 5 consecutive years, 5 consecutive dry years, which is a very, very tough situation, clearly related to climate change and global warming. It's obviously affecting the economic growth of the country. We believe that maybe it's 2% per year in this sequence of 5 years, at least. And can affect the GDP of Morocco on a long-term base at 5 or 6%, which is something we have to adapt to and try to compensate by other factors. There is an emergency. Just to give you an example to outline this fact, Morocco is currently executing an emergency plan for water. Building desalination capacities, building additional dams, additional hydraulic infrastructures. There is a $15 billion plan being executed now for the period 2020 to 2027, which is very high compared to the financial capacities of the country. So this is an example, and I believe every African country is an example with specific specific conditions. Yet, as you know, the African countries have taken big commitments within the Paris Agreement, and the vast majority of climate commitments made by African countries were stronger than the global average. Again, I give the example of Morocco. Morocco has committed to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 45.5% by 2030 compared to 1990, which is a huge, big commitment. There are, various national plans with very strong improvement objectives. Namely, we have the target of reaching 40% of green energy use compared to total energy supply by 2035, compared to 11% until 2020. We have a target of ramping up the proportion of green energies in electricity production from 20% in 2020 to 50%, more than 50% in 2030. 70% in 40 and 80% in 50. So great objectives that I hope would be reached. So we have this overall commitment that is there, but still, as you know, there are some constraints, and one of the constraints is clearly financing. We know that there is more than $1,000 billion needed for Africa for the challenge of facing the climate change problems. Of course, fundings are there. There are tools to finance projects in Africa. Maybe bigger efforts, global efforts in terms of financial aid has to be done, but still, financing is not necessary. Is not sufficient. We need also great capacity building. Secretary Patrick talked about it. Capacity building is very, very important, because to try and meet the objectives, the projects are complex to execute. We are talking about mainly PPP projects with complex, sophisticated setups that need in every country a big contribution in terms of capacity building. We have, I think, to also try to change the focus that is mainly done by multilateral parties and global aid that is focusing on climate change, and to move it more and more to adaptation, because this is the emergency. Africa is not a big contributor, as I said, to climate change. So the emergency and the priority is adaptation, and also capacity building to try and execute the objectives. This session will be also talking about youth contribution to projects in terms of climate change transition. Yes, I think it's important fact, because we need a just transition in Africa, and as you know, Africa is a young continent, and population would be population under 25 would be more than half of Africa's population by 2050. So I think it's an important fact to discuss in this session, and it's key for the future of Africa. And finally, just some remarks about our role as Ayman mentioned. I'm president of a Green Economy Commission of the CGEM, which is the Moroccan Employers Association. Actually, it's this commission is existing in the Moroccan Employers Association since 25 years. There's a big commitment from private sector in Morocco to this ecological and energy transition, because we believe nothing can be successful at this regard without a very close partnership between the private and the public sector. Not only in terms of PPPs, as we know them as, the structuring of projects, but also in the setting up of policies, of public measures. It is needed to have a close partnership between the private and the public sector. Just a few examples of what we are doing, which we achieved lately on standalone or with the public parties. First thing, we have been leading together with all stakeholders, including public and private parties, the setup of the elaboration of a national roadmap for electric mobility. This has been achieved this year, last year, 2022, and it's given an example of what can be done between public and private sector. We have issued, you're talking about SMEs, the small and medium enterprises. We believe this is an important access in the transition. And we issued lately a decarbonization guide that is mainly addressing the SMEs to help them understand what's happening and know about the tools that are present. And this guide is online, open online to all enterprises that need to understand what's happening and to know what levers they can use to move on. We have issued a white paper to the address to the government with 10 propositions of measures and policies for a competitive and low carbon energy transition. And this is very important because it is used in our discussions with the government, and maybe it's helping also the government to know what are the measures that can be concrete on the ground and meeting support of the private sector. We have been involved together with the Ministry of Energy Transition in the elaboration and enacting of a law concerning the distributed generation development in Morocco. Now this law has been voted and it's now in effect, which is an important fact that will contribute to the energy transitions. And finally, in these examples I'm given, CGEM is participating in the organization of major events with discussion of important facts. We have been an organizing party, for example, in what we call a business dialogue on water, which is very important in this period of time. We have been also involved in the Power to X Summit, World Power to X Summit organization, which is an important fact in the energy transition for Morocco, and many other events every year, together with the foundation and together with the public parties and other private parties. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to discuss, to give you some remarks at this opening, and I hope we'll have very good discussion. I will follow part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these remarks. Much appreciated indeed. And as you can see, we have concrete examples in Morocco of the kind of partnerships we're trying to further leverage to the benefit, of course, of the continent as a whole. So without further ado, at this stage, it's time for a keynote presentation, and we're very happy and honored to have with us His Excellency Ephraim Mwepuya Chitima, who's the chair of the African Group of Negotiators, and he's taking some of his very, very busy time to address us. Thank you very much, Honorable Chair, if you could join us to the dais. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and maybe let me start by thanking the Mohammed VI foundation for this initiative, and the Kingdom of Morocco for the leadership on these issues. The Kingdom of Morocco is, of course, has a distinct honor to be the only country on the African continent to have hosted the COP twice. COP7 2001 and then COP22 in 2016 with very huge contributions in terms of the process. And so it's not a surprise that we're having this important discussion under the foundation. In terms of the subject matter of discussion, particularly the private sector and civil society and the youths on climate change. Again, this is important, 2023 being a year for the global stock take, but we also need to take stock within the African context in terms of where we are in addressing the challenge. I'll focus mostly on the youths for a start because I think they're an important component. We got the statistics from the previous speaker indicating the population on the continent. But more than that, as you know, addressing climate change will require a lot of innovations. And innovations, if they are the most innovative group that you can look at, it is the youths. Most of the initiatives that we have, whether it is in the carbon market, for example, or whether it is in technology and all that, requires that you have adept people who adopt new technologies, and that is the strength of the youth. And the involvement of the youths in the fight against climate change is important. But the private sector also comes in, because if you look at the very ambitious NDCs for the African continent, we had the Moroccan case of 45%, which is quite high. Zambia is 47%, reducing emissions by 47% from not 1990 like Morocco, but we are basing in 2010 by 2030. So these are very ambitious targets. These cannot be achieved by governments alone, and we know in terms of the financial flows that we are getting more resources going to the private sector on the continent than what you get to the public sector. And so the role of the private sector is critical, and we need to ensure that they are fully involved in the process. To facilitate involvement of the private sector requires that we've done our homework very well. The policy environment needs to be conducive, and we need to be able to facilitate their participation, because for the private sector, one key issue has been there must be demonstration of what they'll get out of there. And it's nothing to be ashamed of if you are coming from the private sector, because that's how it operates. But increasingly, everyone is realizing that the bottom line is not just about counting dollars and euros or whatever you like, but ensuring that businesses can be sustained. And that is only assured if we address climate change. Because if you look at the energy sector, a number of countries, you have challenges where they can't generate electricity, particularly if it is hydro-based, like in the Zambian case and other countries, because once you don't have water, because of the erratic rain seasons, it means that businesses will suffer. And so private sector is getting increasingly involved in a number of countries in addressing climate change, not just for the profit motive, but by the understanding that it is an important component of their businesses. Away from the NDCs, the other policy instrument that African countries are using in addressing climate change are the national adaptation plans. And yes, the record may not be as great as in the NDCs, because just about 16 of the countries on the continent have developed their NAPs and submitted. But when you look at them, the interventions again involves a lot of innovation. A lot of innovations, a lot of new technologies that are required. And again, it means that the involvement of the youths is very critical. And so you can see that it's not just the population dynamic, which indicates that you have more youths on the continent and you expect to have more of them, but also because the required climate action is very much suited to the youths. And the change of mindset that is required, because if we are to move to low carbon development pathways, it requires change of mindset. The youths are very easily adaptable than the older generation. And I think I should be including myself in that older generation now, but the youths are very much easy to adapt and jump on new technologies. It's from that perspective that for us, from the AGN, for example, we've taken these very seriously. Now, I'm happy to share, I know of colleagues from the continent know that at this session we have brought about 8 new female climate change negotiators trained just this year. In fact, the training involved more. We had about 46 youths, female except one. We had one male squeezed in. But, yeah, but we trained these 46 for them to participate effectively in climate change negotiations. And we made efforts to select 10 from that, to bring them over to start experiencing the actual negotiations, except for logistical challenges of visa. 2 couldn't make it, but we at least have 8. 7 females and 1 male who are participating in the process. That just underscores how importantly we take the gender aspect and youth involvement. I'm looking forward to the conversation, but this is a very interesting and important event. And once again, thank you to the organizers. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'll now invite my colleague, Mrs. Nesma Jourondi, to lead us through the first panel. But thank you very much, Excellency. Thank you very much, Mr. Kirkpatrick. Thank you, Mr. Hadi, as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayman. Thank you, everyone. I invite my colleagues, Mr. Naufel Mahdar, Vice President, Climate Action and Decarbonization at OCP Group, to join me, and Mr. Zubair El-Idrisi Moulay Hassan, Chief of the Environmental Service of the General Directorate of Local Authority, to join me on stage for this first panel. We will try to make use of time and lead our discussions in 15 minutes to give more floor for the youth discussion. So thank you for being with us today and for contributing to this discussion of the importance of building capacity across society in Africa, a multi-stakeholder approach in addressing climate change. First of all, before giving the floor to our panelists, I would like to take this opportunity to share with you a multi-stakeholder initiative led by the Mohammed VI Foundation for Environmental Protection to support the transition to a low-carbon economy. So together with the Ministry of Energy Transition and Sustainable Development, with the Ministry of Trade and Industry, the General Confédération of Moroccan Entreprises, representing the private sector, as mentioned earlier by Mr. Hadi, the Moroccan Agency for Energy Efficiency, the Moroccan Institute of Normalization, and the General Directorate for Local Authority, we have updated and upgraded a calculation tool launched by the foundation back in 2013 to help organizations measure, reduce and offset their greenhouse gas emissions. For us, this is very important because we cannot reduce what we cannot measure. So the measurement part is paramount, and after measuring, it's important, but what's even more important is the reducing part. So we need to reduce our emissions through effective and concrete actions, and then offset the emissions we cannot, unfortunately, reduce due to our activity. And for that, the multi-stakeholders approach is crucial. This is why we work with the public sector, with the private sector, with the territories, to have this economy-wide approach that is crucial to advance in our climate ambition in climate actions. So I would like to give now the floor to my colleague from representing the private sector, Mrs. Naufel Mahdar from OCP Group. OCP is a major actor in the Moroccan economy and also at the continental level in Africa, and they have a very ambitious net zero by 2040. So this is something that we all look forward to, and they have been with us for several years, and they are using the tool to measure their emissions, and they have put in place various projects to reduce the emissions and contribute to a climate action. But I would like to hear more about you from your perspective as a private company to your goals, ambitious goals for 2040, and also the action plan that you are putting in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Nesma. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you, Nesma. Am I going to
I will put
have
your
access to the slides? Hello, everyone. Very happy to be with you today and to share with you some of what we are doing at OCP level to walk the talk towards climate action and decarbonization. Si tu fais CTRL L, je pense.
CTRL L.
CTRL L.
Elle est sur le bureau.
Decarbonization helps for digital as well. Okay, so how can I access the? Okay. So a few words about OCP. We are the major actor of the phosphate-based fertilizers. We have been leading on this value chain since 100 years now, and we have switched from a mining company to a chemical company, then a more client-centric company over these 100 years. I will go through the transformations that we have been through just after this slide. So our revenue last year, $11.3 billion US. We are 33% market share on the phosphate rock on the world trade. Phosphoric acid was at 53% of the world trade, and fertilizers were 27% market share over the world trade. Created 100 years ago, we have been through the first, let's say, S-curve transformation that led us from being a mining company to a chemical company, producing standard fertilizers. Then since, let's say, 20 years ago or 15 years ago, we have been customizing the standard fertilizers to more adapted fertilizers to the soils. And then in the last curve or last S-curve transformation, we have created our own university. We have been going through exploring more what we can do with the rock as what we call hacking phosphate, to explore rare earth, lithium, etc., and also to diversify on other activities and being able to serve the farmer more in depth. Morocco, or OCP, let's say, has in Morocco 70% of the world reserve of phosphate, and this is a nutrient that cannot be synthesized, it's mineral. So we consider ourselves as a custodian for this nutriment, and we have the obligation to use it responsibly. So that's why we are promoting the 4R approach. trying to help farmers to use this nutrient at the right rate at the right moment, at the right place, with the right source, and to preserve the soil health. And we consider our mission first to be a soil health provider. We invest almost 600 million a year in communities. Our campaigns, AgriBooster, School Lab, etc., training farmers, especially in Africa, and helping them better knowing their soil by remote sensing, by sampling, by soil mapping. We have been almost at 2 million farmers that we have accompanied since 2016. We are also working very hard on the green and adaptation and resilience. So 87% of our electricity is coming from clean sources, 70% from cogeneration using heat, and between 11 to 15%, depending on the years, from wind farm energy that we are contracting from wind farm providers, which led us to be at 87% of our electricity from clean sources, and we have a commitment to reach 100% by 2026. Water preservation as well. Today we are at 35 million of water from non-conventional sources, 25 of it from desalination, and 10 million from wastewater treatment. We are doing a lot on customization, on N inhibitors to promote better uptake of the N by the plants. As we know, in the nutrients, that's the N which is generating greenhouse gases, and the P is not generating anyone. From our commitments, we have a commitment for carbon neutrality on the 3 scopes by 2040, and on scopes 1 and 2 by 2030. 100% of our electricity will be green by 2026. All the water we are using, 100% will be from non-conventional sources by 2026 as well. We are working on mine rehabilitation. We are using World Bank standards for emissions, and we are even at better performance than the World Bank requirements, and working on many other aspects. Just on greenhouse gas emissions, today we are at almost 20 million tons of CO2 as footprint, and as we know, for most of the companies, the scope 3 is the major challenge, and for us is almost 80 to 85% of our total scope. We have for that, as we have for 2030 an ambitious roadmap for our scope 1 and 2, we have another ambitious roadmap for our scope 3 as well for 2040. This is part of what we are doing. So this is part of our roadmap. Some of it is already achieved and some is ongoing. So what is achieved is 2 million tons of CO2 avoidance, emissions avoidance from cogeneration, as I talk about it. What is also achieved is the wind farm power plants that we are contracting, and we are using that allow us avoiding the emissions of 373,000 tons of CO2 per year, not using the electricity from the grid. And also the major achievement that we have and we are proud of is the slurry pipeline, which is the first in the world. Of 200 kilometers linking the mines to the chemical plants. And with that, we don't have to dry the rock anymore. So we save on the drying energy and fuel, and we save also on the water. So with that, we avoid the emissions of 665,000 tons of CO2 per year and 1.5 million water that we save as well, 1.5 million cubic meter. At full capacity, we will be avoiding 1 million ton of CO2 emissions and also 3 million cubic meter of water waste. We are also on what is coming. We are ambitious plan for carbon farming. We have already launched initiatives in Africa and in Brazil for that to reach 3 million ton of CO2 avoidance or removal by 2030. We are working on also on the solar power plant as I spoke, and on drying fertilizer from clean sources. This is our increase of performance in the green energy. We are at 87%, and we have 2.3 billion capex to reach 100%. This is the solar pilot that we are planning for drying of the rock from clean sources as well. This is the water program. We want to provide also the closest cities and the farmers with non-conventional water as a part of our resilience program, and to help Morocco adapt to this period of droughts. So we have a plan for 560 million cubic meter of water. This is the slurry pipeline. This is the pilot of green ammonia. We have announced major project for 2027 of producing 1 million ton of green ammonia by 2027, 2 million by 2029, 3 million by 2032. And also working on carbon farming. So I don't have time to go through all this, but we are also doing a lot of on the carbon farming. This have been recognized by international centers. We're A- at CDP, where we have the best score in Africa and among fertilizers company worldwide. And we have been recognized also by Moody's, Sustainalytics, and and the WBA, and a lot of international organizations for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mahdar. Sorry for keeping the time. I need to move to our next speaker, Mr. Zubir from the General Directorate of Local Territories. The floor is yours. I will put your presentation on. But you can start.
Thank you, my colleagues.
There you go.
Burundi.
Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you. Hello, my dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I have the honor to be with you. Yes. Hello. Yes, it's correct. Hello, my dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I have the honor to be with you. Also, I thank the Mohammed VI Foundation for Protection of Environment to invite our direction to present its experience in this few minutes in field of climate finance, but without forget of its mission. Our general direction assists and accompanies the local authorities to carry out their project at the territorial level. But I present two experiences today. One with the Mohammed VI Foundation of the Protection of Environment, and the second project with the Global Glowworm Grid Institute. This for the first project, we have the capacity building of sustainable stakeholder on climate finance in partnership with the Mohammed VI Foundation for the Protection of the Environment in Trawin, Der Hassan, the International Training Center of Environment. I also project context access to climate finance, a high stake for local authorities in the transition to allow climate resilient economy. The principle is the need to strengthen the capacity of Moroccan local authorities on that course. Our direction and from Mohammed VI Foundation for Protection of the Environment as a strategic partner set up a climate finance training program for local authorities. The participatory approach 3 main acts. The first is scientific basis and history of climate change. The second analysis of the climate and environment profile of the target region. The third, climate finance uses. The principal goal is the first is strongest scales of local stakeholders on sitting on climate-related projects and upgrade their knowledge on climate change, support national effort to combat climate change, because you have the first, the short time for me to pass some, but the project achieved for 1,000 local stakeholders have benefited from its training program, and those local climate impact projects were identified and eligible for climate change finding and drafting. But when I finish my expose, I give it to you the list for this two projects. AYCH satisfaction rate is 70%. The course I to pass for this course, but major sector is the public lighting, controlled landfill, reuse of treated water. The fourth is shoring stabilization, fire against flooding, reuse treated water is passed. Project files inputs for the GID. This is the importance for our where the tracing is the GID of project with climate impact address to a local visit and fits to priority of territorial impact project.
Thank
this
you, Mr. Thank
this
you,
is
Mr.
the project.
But
the second,
but
the second project with the Global Green Growth Institute, the same project was carried out with the Triple J, but focused on the region, the Tanger, Tangier, Tétouan, Al Hoceima. We developed of 10 concepts not for project eligible for finance climate.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay. Without further ado, thank you very much, both of you, for being with us, and I give the floor to my colleague Ismail for the youth part of the discussion. Thank you.
The Voices and Actions of African Youth for Climate Action, launched by Her Royal Highness Princess Lala Hasna in 2019, President of the Mohammed VI Foundation for Environmental Protection, during the United Nations Secretary-General Climate Summit in New York. The African Youth Climate Hub is an initiative to respond to and amplify voices in action of youth, starting with African youth. The initiative has two main axes to support an empowered, included, and equal youth, physical and digital. Both these dimensions provide a space for youth to engage in environmental training, fostering intergenerational engagement and providing green job and training opportunities, while answering youth-defined needs and highlight youth-defined expertise. With its 6 components, the hub aims to connect generations, co-construct knowledge and expertise, concretely support youth-led projects, celebrate youth stories across Africa, identify and highlight green jobs, opportunities, and finally collect and provide data on and for youth in the continent. With more than 10,000 users engaged, 23 ambassadors and 10 projects from 9 African countries being incubated, we flipped the script by recalibrating the narrative on African youth's role in addressing climate change challenges. Instead of being viewed solely as victims of climate change impacts, African youth are empowered to be active agents of change by providing a platform for young African climate entrepreneurs to concretize their projects. The Hub reimagines the narrative of African youth as innovators and problem solvers. The new narrative created is that African youth can and are already leading in climate action.
What we expect from the incubation program is to further develop our product live box and also utilize all of the networks that we are doing here in Morocco, so that hopefully by the end of the program we'll be not only improving our product and service, but hopefully also building our first pilot here and extending our business in Morocco.
The African Youth Climate Hub, in alignment with the Summer of Solutions and the broader United Nations space, is aiming to scale up as well as develop and be replicated in several regions of the world, while giving priority to the ones left behind. Support the African Youth Climate Hub. Support a sustainable and innovative Africa.
Hello, everyone. I think you can hear me better here. I'm Ismail Farji. I'm the coordinator of the African Youth Climate Hub, and I thank our previous panelists for giving us the time to give this space for youth in general, and therefore I would like to call our panelists for this session, starting with Evelyn Ador, who's... are you here, Evelyn? Yes, please join us on the floor. I would like also to welcome Juliet Grace Luede, and also Ms. Latifa Al-Mansouri, and as well as Jean-Bertrand Mandou and Samuel Okorie. Please be seated. Thank you. The aim of our discussion today, mainly to contextualize on how African youth are not only victims of climate change, but they're also proactive actors. And therefore, it is very important for us to highlight some interesting points on how African youth are engaged within the processes that are already in place with the multi-stakeholder approach. And it is therefore why we have our 5 panelists that will speak on different perspectives in order to answer 2 major questions. And the first question is, based on your experience, what are the key qualities of African youth that enables them to adapt to change and act as leaders to innovate in different sectors? And the second question is more related to the barriers that needs to be addressed in order to unlock the full potential of African youth to become lead innovators and examples to the rest of the world. Therefore, I would like to give the floor first to Samuel. You have been very engaged in the last days here at Bonn and also following up specifically on the loss and damage. And I would like very much from your perspective and from your experience until now to respond to those 2 questions. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Samuel Sikore, and I am a Global Climate Ambassador and also the contact point for Young Loss and Damage. And I would like to point out specifically that African youth are change makers. They are agents of change, and wherever they are, you can easily spotlight their actions, and you can easily spotlight most of the things they have been doing, to act on the global problems. And for instance, at this SBA at the moment, we've seen where African youth champion a lot of responses to most of the agendas, and also we've seen most of the interventions that have been made by African youth. And also when we are looking at the agenda on loss and damage, we've also seen how the African group, the G77 that are also made up with developing countries but championed by African group, have also made a statement about the loss and damage. And we have also seen where youth are also included in the negotiation and intervention process. I'll give instances of countries like Togo that involved youth. We also have instances of, I think, Mali also that also involved youth. So these are things that we know that youth are doing. And youth are resilient in nature. They don't just take no as no, but they try to look into that no if it's actually something that can be innovated to maybe, okay, let's have a common interest where we both benefit. So it's more like a win-win kind of thing. And I will end by saying that youth also have the capacity, especially African youth have the capacity to develop a coping mechanism that can address climate change issues. For instance, sub-Saharan Africa is regarded or recognized as one of the most vulnerable regions in the world when it comes to climate change issues. And most of the people that have been frontlining, advocacy actions to address climate change issues are youth in the African region, in these regions. We've seen interventions, even the Mohammed VI Foundation as well, what they are doing to empower youth, and how they are being able to recognize youth in building innovative responses to address climate change issues. And the second question, what needs to be done to help youth, or what needs to be done to address most of the challenges faced by youth, I see a lot more with acceptability and upscaling of innovative solutions to climate crisis. Recognizing youth first, that is acceptability, because you can't give what you don't have, and you can't also be giving something in a place you are not welcomed. So Africa, we should be able to accept the innovative responses and also innovative ideas of youth in the African region, and not actually pushing them aside. And I will also talk about the need to include youth in most of the processes, and then lastly, providing on funding for most of their initiatives, because a lot of African youth have ideas, brilliant ideas. In fact, they even have startups, but part of the thing that have been keeping them at the loop is lack of funding and lack of accessibility of these funds. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samuel. It follows the ordering of our participants, especially giving the floor now to Juliet Grace, who's newly our ambassador of the African Climate Hub within the plus 20 ambassadors that we have. And I would like you, in responding to those questions, to emphasize a bit on the gender perspective, especially through your activities and how you have been engaged so far with all the challenges, and how we need to address more this gender gap that is present on all levels and all sectors, especially when it comes to Africa.
Thank you very much, Ishmael. Good afternoon, everyone. As introduced, Juliet Grace is my name, and I am, should be on, and I'm from Uganda. Yes, I think the issue of gender from past experience, when you look at it, or the easiest interpretation has been women. So many of us, when we think gender, we are thinking women, but what happens to the boy child? What happens to the other sexual minorities? So I feel like if we are to address the issue of gender, we need to be inclusive of everyone. And that's something, again, like Samuel has said, that I've seen even with the work of the Mohammed Foundation, especially in the incubation program that's being run. We do not look at this initiative is run by a female or male or anyone. There's that inclusivity that's being taken into consideration, but then also the learning platform that's created for us young people. I'm from Uganda, but then I get to interact with colleagues from Nigeria or even across, so there's beauty in that. And I don't like focusing on the negatives, which are the barriers, because even barriers are opportunities in themselves. So if we identify the barrier is on funding opportunities for young people on their initiatives, what is our definition of the funding opportunities and the mechanisms? But then also as young people, how do we address them? But then also, again, one of the things the keynote speaker mentioned was on how do we actually make sure that we retain the capacities that young people are getting to make sure that we continue to scale them down back home. And this really requires the involvement of our national and regional governments. How do we ensure that even as we engage at global level, we take this feedback back home? And personally, that's one of the initiatives that I get to do. With everything that I learn through the hub, I make sure that I share my testimonies and the good things that I have learned so that we can be able to replicate this back home.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Juliet. And this actually aspect of learning from here and bringing it back home is something that is very important. It is also a responsibility for us youth to do it. And actually a perfect representation of what we learn here needs to go home is through that through the climate negotiators program that is being that is happening right now. And we have specifically our colleague Evelyn Ador, whose story is very interesting because she has been transitioning now from the civil society aspect and getting more in the negotiation space. And I would like you to highlight this aspect of how it is your role and responsibility to bring the voices of the unheard within this space and be able to actually push towards towards their voices to be heard, and how it will be your responsibility to bring whatever results here and share it with the community. Please go ahead.
So thank you for the opportunity. So as a young person, I started as an activist, trying to get change at the national level. We're always raising banner in Ghana, advocating against policies and all that. But one of the things that we quickly learned was that to really make the change happen, you have to be part of the decision making. And so we formed the Youth in Natural Resource and Environmental Governance platform, where young people in Ghana came together to try and be part of the decision making on how our natural resource is being utilized, how the money that we make is being utilized. At the same time, have an umbrella platform where we can advocate for policies against policies that we think does not favor the youth. And through that process and through that collaboration, I was able to be nominated to join the Ghana negotiating team, and that has brought me here. But to answer your question, I think one thing that African youth has that is helping us is the ability to work hard. As an African young person, you are not allowed not to work hard, and you are not allowed to give up. Even as a baby, you are given roles and responsibilities at home, and giving up is not an option. And I think that's one of the reasons why we are able to adapt and change. And African youth are taught to be perseverance, and you have to persevere. And we know and we understand the impact of climate change on us and our future. And so we are trying our best to also make sure that we come up with homegrown solutions to adapt and to mitigate climate change at the community and the national level and even at the regional level. And that's why I'm so happy to be here. With the barriers, I think one of the key barriers is the lack of mentorship for African youth. And I know Mohammed VI Foundation is doing well in that, but also the kind of mentorship we receive are always short. Most of us here as African youth are the first to do anything in our family. And so from your family setting, they may not even understand what you are doing. And so you may not even get the mentorship you need from your family. So you have to look elsewhere for mentorship. And sometimes you get a mentorship program for 3 months, you attend, and then that is it. But what we need is sustained mentorship. If you see an African youth that you are interested in and you want to push forward, don't just give a 3-month mentorship program and leave the person to go and cater for themselves. You need to sustain the mentorship, continuously grooming the person and making sure the person is able to grow to the next level. That is one of the barriers that needs to be broken. And also, I think a lot of African youth are interested in activism, which is great, and community work, which is great, but being part of the policy work is very difficult, and it can be very boring. And so young people from Africa are always shown from that. But I would encourage us to take part in the decision making. We have to learn. It's really a difficult process because you have to learn and go the extra mile. But once you get to sit at the table, you are at least able to make a little impact. You are able to influence a decision towards what you want to see and the benefits you want young people to see. And so we need to break that fear of sitting at the table and take more action there. Thank you.
They're true, very, very true words. And actually this aspect of mentorship and this aspect of actually educating our young people to, first of all, understand what is climate change, because we have the privilege here to talk about it and go deeper in the details and the discussions, but yet there's a huge community that doesn't understand what is it and also have challenges to accessing the information. And therefore it is very important to invest in climate education, which is the basis of whatever actions that we are taking here for it to be sustainable, so that the people out there on the ground be able to understand what we're talking about and what we're trying to advancing here. And that's why it is important to commend the different actions that are happening in terms of climate education when it comes for the greening education partnerships, for example, that is being implemented right now, and also on the different work that is being done on climate education. And which brings us to climate education in Africa specifically with Jean-Bertrand Mandou, who's the regional director with earthday.org, to highlight this importance of climate education and how it needs to be advanced within the agenda. Please, Jean-Bertrand, you have the floor. And later on, we will switch from an African perspective and then opening the door to the world.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity. So just like my colleague said, that this is quite a fundamental issue for us as continent, as African youth, but I would take us maybe mixing with the barriers that the issue of communication and the African story being told is also a huge barrier. And when we meet at these platforms such as the negotiations, our policy formulation, our frameworks, they are normally shaped by the global agenda or the developmental agenda that we speak about. It could be how the global village should run, how the global village should exist. But the narratives and the stories now, such as employment, such as civic education, such as how people are surviving in the other parts of the continent, is often forgotten, which makes the numbers at times not add up, and it limits even our developmental or our goals that we set unattainable or difficult to achieve. So that being said, I think there is need for civic engagement, civic education, also the ability for us to unlearn as developmental practitioners, as the negotiators, and also maybe invest, appealing to some of the presenters that have been saying there are innovations that they are implementing at national level, international levels. We need to take into perspective that how are these communities adapting? What are the projects that they are doing? How are they surviving, given that, for instance, Zimbabwe is said to have an unemployment rate of 60%. Is it true, or is it something that we are just reading passively? So there is a way that we are adapting, there's a way that we are surviving, with our vegetation, with our nature, with so many things, you know. So we need to integrate that, and I think it's about time we started investing in the planet. We incorporate this in our NDCs. Like I said, our policies are not guided if we don't incorporate the community story. So that barrier itself needs us to break, and we need loads of financial support directed to this, not to be just hidden, you know, as an implementing or as a cross-cutting issue, the issue of education or ACE, hidden with capacity building, etc. We need to actually make it a priority because it's fundamental for any human development.
Thank you very much, Jean. And actually, climate education is the basis to evolve and to be able to integrate all these processes. And since we're talking about climate education, and since COP28 is happening in the UAE, there are also other opportunities that are important when it comes to educating our young people for the environment. And therefore, we have with us Ms. Latif Al-Mansouri from the Environment Agency of Abu Dhabi, and who's also a COP Youth Climate Delegate, which is very different from the Climate Negotiators Program. This program is led by the COP28 presidency, and the other one is quite a separate aspect that needs to be clarified. Please, you have the floor to talk to us about the 12th World Environmental Education Congress, and you have the floor for exactly 4 minutes. I told you 5, but this time it's 4.
Sure. Hello, everyone. It's such amazing to be sharing the panel with such bright and youth individuals. As Ismail mentioned, my name is Latif Al-Mansouri. I'm from the Environment Agency, but I'm also representing the youth at COP28. So starting off with the World Environmental Educational Congress. So simply, this Congress is the largest international Congress addressing education. And as per our COP28 strategy, education is one of our main pillars we're looking at. Our strategy is PAVE, participate, action, voice, and education. So starting off with youth, talking about education, and as we are the future, we know what our type of education we're requiring to achieve climate change and basically change our future. So World Environmental Educational Congress was originally established in Portugal back in 2003. And after it, there was a number of congresses hosted all around the world. And for the first time in the history of WEC, it will be hosted in the MENA region under the patronage of His Highness Sheikh Hamdan bin Zayed, ruler representative of Al-Dhafra and chairman of the Environment Agency Abu Dhabi. So the theme of next year's Congress will be connecting people, creating tomorrow. The Congress aims to basically bring in educators locally, internationally, from NGOs, academia, and government entities to energize the environmental educational platform, aiming to connect people to create a better tomorrow. So the themes of the upcoming Congress are summarized in 10 themes that vary from innovation, from climate, from biodiversity, from artificial intelligence, and many other things such as sustainable development. Therefore, I'm here today inviting you all to participate to our upcoming Congress in 3 main methods. So you can participate either by submitting an abstract proposal with a research you're currently working on or you're deciding to start. You can participate in the Youth Educational Environmental Congress, which is a part of the Environmental Congress that focuses on creating sessions, youth-focused, and are presented by youth as well. So you're welcome to submit the proposal as a speaker or specific sessions or specific agendas you have. And lastly, of course, attendance. You all are invited to attend to the World Environment Educational Congress in Abu Dhabi. I hope we have time for the video because I would love to show you the beautiful Abu Dhabi and we would love to have you there. So let's just take a couple minutes to look at this video.
Thank you very much. While the video is uploading, hopefully internet will be helpful to us. Yes. It is also very important to highlight that although in as we are different regions, there's a very a general effort to engage within environmental education, and for that we have to also remind that the 7th World Environmental Education Congress that happened in Marrakesh is this event comes as a follow-up on all the efforts that have been engaged, and we are very much happy that we bring whatever content that has been produced and whatever efforts that have been done since all those previous World Environmental Congresses to contribute to all these efforts. Our browser is up to date, but the video is not opening.
Maybe switching to Chrome would work.
Yeah, we're trying that.
Can you do like WIC 2024? YouTube.
Should be.
Yeah, the first
This one? Okay, then we will leave you with this video, and I think we conclude on our side. So at the end of the video, we're all free to the discussion.
Dazu gehören beispielsweise die anteiligen Ausgaben für den Laptop oder
really looking forward to UAE. I would like to thank our panelists. I would like to thank our audience. We don't have much time. We need to leave the room for the other organizers. Thank you again, and looking forward to our next event. Thank you. Whoever wants to scan for the week, it will be shared now. Thank you very much. Sorry. Yeah, well done. Thank you for sticking to the time. Thank you very much. Thank you.